Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. Well, today's guest is a seasonal lecturer at the University of Regina, Saskatchewan. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeffrey Walters. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so one of the things I'm asking, want to know about seasonal. There's different seasons like spring, summer, winter, fall. There's Christmas season, Easter season. So what kind of season does this refer to?
Right, it's actually sessional lecturer, so every
Oh,
season actually works. So there
oh,
we go.
darn it. I misread things all the time, by the way, just so you know.
That's okay.
Okay, so sessional. Okay.
Yes.
So okay, tell me what you do as a lecturer, like what you speak on.
All right. Essentially, what's you could call cross-posted between sociology and justice studies. So those are my two major departments that I work for, and so the vast majority of the classes that I do instruct happen to be those two genres.
Oh, okay. Are you ever late for class? And if so, did the students ever call you on it?
I'm never late for class. I have canceled classes on short notice for various reasons, and they sometimes call you out. There's always this toss-up, right? There's half the students that don't really want to be there, and then there's the other half that, really, really want to be there. So no matter what happens, you're never going to please everybody. But, it is what it is. We try our best to ensure that, we actually have class for one thing, and two, that it's worth their time, effort, and money.
So how does somebody get a position like that?
Well, first you need to have a certain type of degree. I have a PhD ABD. I never actually finished my PhD for various reasons, but at least a PhD ABD or a master's degree in a field that is comparable to the class that happens to be open. Every university has the vast majority of their courses aren't really taught by tenured professors. They're taught by sessionals such as myself, and they're just contracts. So every single semester there's a whole pile of contracts that are there, and people like me, we bid on certain few or expressed interests, and then the university sorts it out on who gets what, and then if we're chosen, we get the contract.
Oh, I hate bidding on anything.
Yeah, it's always stressful, and it's always semester to semester, and so it's not really big on job security, right? You could have a whole bunch one semester and then nothing the next semester. So it's a little bit stressful every time the semester is about to end and start up again.
Right. When you first went to university, at that point, what was your goal?
My goal was to essentially become a professor, and life tends to steer you in different directions. And I had started up a family with a lot of children, and then I worked for the federal government in various positions for a long period of time after I finished grad school. And it wasn't really until about 2012 that I got my first contract as a sessional, kind of just to make a little extra money on the side while I was working. And it turned out I actually enjoyed it. And so more and more I segued into more sessional jobs until now it's kind of a dominant thing in which I do.
Oh, right. So can you talk about some of the jobs you had working for the federal government?
Sure. I was recruited out of grad school for Department of Agriculture, at least it was called back then, as a senior program officer for what was then the CASE program. It's now called Agri-Stability. So that was my first one. Then I moved to what's called the Indian Residential School Adjudication Secretariat. It was a one-off office that was created to give compensation for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's um, essentially compensation for victims. So our job was to investigate some potential victims, with their stories, and then try and figure out suitable compensation.
Right.
After that, I worked as a corporate advisor to SGI Canada. That's their competitive side, and then that was when I started to segue into teaching.
Okay. So when you were had that job, the position where, trying to rec compensate for the reconciliation thing, that must have been really tough, I would think, right?
It was tough all around because first you'd have to essentially interview the claimant, and you'd have to put that on file, then you'd have to transcribe it, and then you'd have to figure out arbitrarily because what the compensation would be based upon their level of trauma. But I always think that as hard as it was for us to listen to it, it was obviously infinitely harder for the person giving that testimony, right? So that kind of kept us in line, right? It's not about us, it's about them.
Right, yeah. Sorry, something just popped up on my screen. I just have to get rid of, sorry, I'm a little bit
Yeah,
distracted there.
that's okay.
Okay, so now for okay, let's get back to your classes. So like you say, some of the students don't really want to be there. Are they obvious about it?
Some are, some aren't. But I mean, again, it's not really about me, right? I mean, I'm not there to fulfill a duty. And there could be nobody there and I'd still do a lecture because that's my job.
Oh,
Or it could be everybody there. I mean, it's not like high school where you keep, attendance and all that kind of stuff. They're all adults and you treat them as adults. Ultimately, they're the ones that are paying for the course. And you know what? If they don't want to show up, that's their business. All right. I'm not going to sit there and try and track them down like I'm their father or something. That's not really my job to do that. And so at the end of the day, those that tend to show up and engage generally do better, obviously, right? Excuse me, because that's just how the game is played. But again, at the end of the day, it isn't, it's not about me. I mean, I don't take offense if somebody doesn't show up, and I don't take offense if somebody, yawns or is on their phone. I mean, that's their business. Again, at the end of the day, they are adults and they can do what they want to do. They pay for it as long as they're not disruptive or somehow gum up the works. It's essentially whatever they want to make it to be.
right. I find that very interesting that some people would like, as you say, pay and then not want to be there, because I was grew up at where you did grade 8 and you got stopped and you got a job, right? That's the way it was. And then when I went back to school, it was something I wanted to do, and it was so wonderful. Like what a wonderful experience to be somewhere because I wanted to be. So I don't understand why somebody would pay for something and not want to be there. It's
Yeah.
it boggles my mind.
Yeah, but there's a number of reasons. One, sometimes they don't even want to be in university at all. It's not their money, perhaps, or they
Mm,
just have no interest in it, or they started off strong and then they realize they don't want to, so they're just kind of riding it out. Other times, some of the classes are prerequisites that they need for their degree. And it's the old adage is that you can't like everything. And so sometimes it just doesn't appeal to somebody and they have to ride it out because they need the class for their
oh,
degree.
yeah.
And it just ends up turning out that it just wasn't for them. I mean, obviously I've taken enough university classes to get where I'm going. And I was in the same situation. In some classes, you read the description, you took a few classes and you thought, well, this is interesting. But over the course of 4 months,
Mm,
sometimes you just shut off, and by that time it's too late to drop it or whatever the case may be. And so, there's any number of reasons why they may or may not like it. And it could also be just a personal thing too. Sometimes you just don't like somebody, and if that happens to be, it's it kind of poisons the well. So, I mean, we're dealing with people, and everybody has are complex human beings. Based upon what their likes and dislikes are and their attitudes and characteristics. And when you have, anywhere between 20 to 100 people in a room, you're going to have a diverse number of opinions and just mannerisms. And that's just the nature of the beast.
right. Now, as a sessional, I wanted to say seasonal again, lecturer, has it only been at the University of Regina, or have you taught at other universities?
Primarily at the University of Regina. I did have one at the U of S once, but that was kind of a one-off. And it's fine. I mean, I live in Regina, so to me, obviously, applying to other places, and I have 5 kids. I mean, applying to
Okay.
other places really doesn't work unless I have a personal jet or a personal helicopter or something. And there's enough positions here necessarily that someone who would want to make a career of it can make a go of it. And so at the end of the day, it just kind of makes sense to streamline where I am,
Right.
but for better or worse.
Now, just thinking about, having that many children, I was going to ask about hobbies, but what spare time do you have? Because being a dad and.
Yeah, well, most of the kids are older now. There's only 2 that are living at home, and so it kind of helps that way. The people that do live at home, one of our daughter is special needs, so she's not going anywhere ever. So we're kind of have dealt with that, but it's a little bit easier now that 3 have already moved on doing their own thing,
Yeah.
and it makes it a bit easier for us. So I mean, we weathered the storm, I guess, with a minimum amount of gray hairs and wrinkles. So. It's a little bit easier now. I always find it interesting that friends of mine or whatever will have one kid, they'll have their first child and they'll say how difficult it is. And it's true, it is very difficult. But then when you have the second one, you look back at the first one and say, well, that was so easy, and then that's kind of how it works. So by the time you're at 4 or 5, anything less than that's kind of a cakewalk for the most part and how it works. And so, just it is what it is. It's just life. You just plan around it. This means less time watching TV or doing something non-productive.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So, I had a question in mind and it just skipped my mind oh, sometimes that happens, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, yeah, of your children that have moved out, the adults, somebody calls them, what do they call them? Kidults. kiddos, so they're still your kids, but they're adults. So I
Yeah.
like kind of like that word. Are they any of them going to be doing what the type of work you do?
As far as I know at this point, absolutely not, and that's fine. They've lived through it, and so I think it's pretty natural if you allow somebody to grow on their own, for them to develop their own interests, they're independent of yours. I've always found it kind of curious that somehow, my characteristics or my interests should somehow metastasize to my children. I mean, we're obviously independent individuals with, complex, independent, ways and means about us, biologically. So I would find it more suspicious if they chose my path, and I'd ask them, well, can't you think of your own? That type of thing. I think it's important that they experience different things. I mean, if I wanted a clone of myself, I would just clone myself and, have a doppelganger out there, I guess, to do what I do. But, I think it's easier and better for them to explore their own things.
Right. Now let's explore cloning. I just thought about that, what you said you would do. I have social anxiety. So if I was to clone myself, the clone would not have social anxiety. So would you do something like that? Like have your clone do something that don't like to do or are uncomfortable doing?
Right. So take out the flaws, that type of thing.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
interesting thing about that, though, is that there's, the law of unintended consequences. So if you try to do that, try to essentially arbitrarily change something, there's probably a whole host of other issues that you'll have later that were unintended. It's, it's like having children in general, right? If you
Yeah,
try and steer them a certain way, there's unintended consequences as well.
yes.
So I guess cloning wise, I would probably just clone myself basically and let it grow on its own. Otherwise, who knows what might happen along the
Yeah, what would it change? It's kind of interesting concept when you think about it, right? What would it change?
way.
Okay, so now tell me again about sessional. Like, how long is a teaching session?
The session is the length of a semester, so about 4 months. And so an entire calendar year has basically 3 semesters in it, right? There's winter, there's fall, and then there's spring, summer. So it's chopped up into 4 months, and then again, every 4 months, there's a bunch of contracts, and we essentially express interest, and it's up to the university to figure out who gets what. There is what you could say is there's a hierarchy, right? It's based upon your experience, how long you've been there for, and it takes a while to get to the top, and then you can have preferential treatment. It's like any other job, right? So it kind of works that way. But yeah, it all depends on the contracts. So sometimes you'll have plenty of contracts to choose from, and sometimes there's almost nothing. And so it really does depend on the semester. It depends on how well the university is doing, and outside issues like COVID for a while, obviously put a freeze on a lot of classes and all that. And so it's as I mentioned before, job security. If you are looking for job security, this is not the job for you. But if you enjoy the teaching aspect, and we're downplaying some of the positives. I mean, they're obviously the negatives are more strong, but the positives are because you're a sessional lecturer and you're not tenured, you don't have to or feel obligated to have to do any type of research or anything that helps the department that way. And so all we are just basically professional lecturers, right? And in certain cases, if you do your job well and you get seniority, your pay can be better than tenured professors in certain ways, depending on how your career transpires, I guess. But it is entirely possible. So there are benefits to it. Um, there's drawbacks and benefits to anything, I guess. But we can't put a too sour of a face on this particular position.
Sure.
It's not like oh, sorry, you couldn't make tenureship. Well, some don't want tenureship because it locks you in place. It makes you do certain things you don't want to do, and you're kind of stuck with it. And so in this way, it's a little more flexibility.
Right, for sure. Now, as you said, you're paid to teach, so it matters the size of the class. But do you like it when you have a large class? Like, would you prefer that to having just a few students?
It depends. Normally, what happens is that, the more junior classes have more students. And the junior classes obviously have more issues. Excuse me. Obviously, they're first starting out. They don't know what's what. It's very, very difficult transition time for them. So it's a completely different animal. As you move up to more senior courses, 400 level classes, 400 in particular, there's under 20 students there, and they're veterans by this point, right? They know the ins and outs. So the conversations can be better. You can get a little more, in content and intense and get to know the students more. But it's more responsibility too, because it's a higher, it's a more senior class or course, and so the outcomes need to be a little bit higher. So again, there's positives and negatives. I mean, if you have a class, one time I had a class of like 280 students, and it was interesting, but there's always the issue. It's like, can they hear you? And there's always, when you have 280 people, even if only 1% has issues with the class, that's still like what, 28 people, So well, I guess that's 10%. But point being is that, even if only 10% were having issues, that's the size of like a senior class that has issues. And so the bulk of it becomes very difficult to maintain. But there's no benefit or drawback necessarily that's stronger one way or the other.
Right, because it's not like performing, and when you perform, the bigger the audience, the more energy you feed off of.
Yeah, it's not quite a performance. I'll put
Yeah.
it that way. You're there for a specific reason necessarily, not necessarily to entertain them. And sometimes I think, it's 2024, and sometimes people are looking for entertainment. And I don't have any laser light shows or go-go girls dancing in the background. It's just not going to happen. So at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, some people enjoy certain lectures, some people find them boring, or whatever the case may be. And the same with me. People will find either how I talk insightful or boring. It just depends on the individual.
Right, yeah. So, well, for those that do enjoy it, like, do you get feedback?
Yes. The interesting thing, and I'm sorry I keep clearing my throat. I'm kind of
It's
just
okay. Yeah.
trying to get rid of a cold that's been here forever. I know it comes across bad on Zoom, but anyway, we do have what's called course evaluations at the end of each semester where students can, in fact, give feedback and rankings based upon your class. And what I've found with that, it's interesting. It's those that feel strongly one way or the other that actually do respond to those things. It's not mandatory. And those that, don't really care, don't really do it. So you either have really, positive feedback or really negative feedback. It's very rare you get stuff in the middle because only if somebody who's feeling very strong about something will they actually take the time to do it. So it's of limited value, right? I mean, it's basically finding a person that dislikes you most and likes you most, opining on you, and there's no middle ground, so it doesn't really do much. I guess it's maybe it's a cathartic moment for the student to be able to get their stuff down like
Yeah.
that, but it's of limited value. And so, yeah, students, if they enjoy you, they enjoy you because they'll make an effort of taking more of the classes that you teach, and then they'll say, I've taken these classes from you because I enjoyed it. Students that don't necessarily enjoy your teaching style or you personally, they tend not to show up again unless they have to, like if it's a prerequisite course or something like that. So it's very noticeable one way or the other. But I would have to say like 95% of students just don't care one way or the other. They're just there to get their course done and move on to the next one and get through university and then start their lives out in the real world.
So is it the type of courses where they hand in papers?
Yes, there's always going to be most courses. I mean, most university courses are kind of template. There's going to be like a midterm exam at the very least. There's a final exam at the end of the semester. In between that, there's going to be like a term paper, or at the very least, right, a major term paper. Some instructors will have more assignments, some will have fewer. It also depends on the type of course, but that's kind of the meat and potatoes, like the must. The must is a midterm, a final exam, and a term paper. And so the idea is to try and allow them to show that they know the course materials in different ways. Right. So obviously a term paper is different than a midterm, and a midterm is different than a final. All these types of different ways to, because some people are strong writing and some people aren't. Some people are strong doing tests, some people aren't. So if you mix it up that way, you give everybody kind of a fighting chance to show what they can do.
Right. Now, as a lecturer, do you get an assistant?
It depends on the size of the course, actually. If there's, I think, don't quote me on this, if there's more than 40 students, then they'll assign you a teaching assistant if they have it. They have a pool of teaching assistants, but it's usually a pretty small pool. And sometimes,
Right.
the larger classes, of course, get them because obviously it's harder to navigate a larger class.
Mhm.
But generally speaking, if the class is at least 40 students or maybe 45 now, they may have changed the rules, but they will offer you a teaching assistant. And so those teaching assistants, which are often students themselves,
Right.
not of your classes, but students, they kind of just help, let's say, grading or doing certain things for you to take it off the plate. They do not go and, pick up our laundry. They don't go get us coffee or anything stupid like that, right? It's very professional. It's based around the class.
So does it ever happen, like within that 4 month period, you start off with very large class and then gradually it gets smaller? Because I doubt if it would get larger.
No, it definitely doesn't get larger. It does get smaller, and it's pretty normal that there's certain dates in which a student can drop a class to get their tuition money back,
Right?
and that's within the first few weeks. So there will be what we call chopping and changing in the first couple weeks, based upon students. As I mentioned before, if they're there and they find they're not liking it, they go and move on, and then other, students do that from their classes and come in. So there will be some variation, but normally, and because it's 4 months and because it's not mandatory to show up, and because human beings sometimes just get tired, in many cases, there'll be fewer and fewer students in lectures, especially what we call the dog days of the semester, the third month in. Everybody's tired. Everybody's been doing it for 3 months and a bunch of other classes and a bunch of assignments. So that's the time of year where the least number of students show up. Near the end, more tend to show up because they start to panic and say, "Oh my God, I've missed a whole bunch. I have to get caught up." Or they think they can get caught up that way. So by the end, it kind of is a reversion back to the mean, I guess. But generally speaking, there is going to be dropouts. Every course has it. People just coming in the first few days or first few weeks saying, "This is just not for me," or "I'm not understanding what's going on, and it's best for me if I drop the class." And that's pretty typical.
Right. So if you have a student who started off doing, really good grades, but you can see that for whatever reason that their marks are going down or whatever, do you go to them or ever say to them, "Hey, what's happening? He needs extra help," or is that ever offered?
Not traditionally, and there's a reason for that. It's because that implies personal relationship, and
Ah,
we're
okay.
not teachers, right? We're not sitting there with a lesson plan. We're instructors at a university. It's a different thing, and sometimes first year students struggle with this a bit coming out of high school,
Yeah.
because in high school, there are people that may check up on you and stuff like that to ensure that you're okay and all that kind of stuff, and that's part of their job. Instructors and professors, we're not teachers, we're experts in the field in which we're teaching and which we're lecturing on. So at the end of the day, it's not really about that. It wouldn't be anything more than that than if, let's say, I was working in a factory and I noticed that one guy took some sick time or whatever. Most cases, people would just go with the flow. And the problem with having personal relationships, which is not particularly advisable,
Right.
is that, in certain cases, some people take it too far. And I'm not saying professors or instructors take it too far, but sometimes students do. Like I've had in the past, like I've been doing this for, well, 13 years now. And some students, they do try get a little too attached. And so they'll try and message you inappropriately and stuff like that.
Mm.
And that's not where you want to be. So you have to have this relationship. And it's explained to them the first couple classes when we meet. This is our relationship, right? We have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
transactional relationship basically where I give you the resources you need to pass the class, and your duty is to take those resources and finish the assignments and get them in on time.
Right.
And so, sometimes it's sad if somebody's having trouble or something like that, but we're not psychologists, right?
Yeah. Right.
So, and we're not medical doctors. And so for us to try and intervene like that is actually malpractice in many ways.
Oh, okay. And it also
So
could create a whole bunch of issues, right? As you said.
exactly. And that's the thing, right? I mean, for people with PhDs, I mean, their doctorates are in a certain field. It's not medical, right? They're not medical doctors and they're not psychologists. And so if students are somehow, thinking they can rely on that from them and we say something that ultimately turns out harmful for them, I'd prefer not to have the lawsuits, right? So there's that. And the unfortunate aspect, as I mentioned before, it's a professional relationship with adults, right? It's a transactional professional relationship, for better or worse. Would we like to help, and especially if we see something horrible, will we try and do something? Um, there have been cases where I've, talked with students who are having some serious trouble, and I suggest that, you should probably talk to this person or go to the counselor at the U of S or U of R rather. There's other avenues which they can do and get some help. But to presume that somehow I can help them is just not realistic.
Okay. As I said, you're upfront about that at the beginning.
Yeah.
They're all made aware, right? I'm just wondering too, like I've never been to university. I think it would have been great. But I'm just remembering going from like middle school to high school and how that was a big transition for me.
Yes.
It must be even more so from high school to university. So I'm just wondering, do you think would be an idea if there was some way that they're better prepared to go into university?
Yes, there's actually it's what some of us have noticed. Sorry, what some of us have noticed over the course, like there's been some sessionals that, I've known for 12, 13 years now, right? And so we know each other very well. And we also have noticed that it appears, and this just might be subjective, it appears that students are progressively, less and less prepared for university,
Right.
even if it's just style of writing or whatnot. And I'm not so sure if it's anything other than here in Saskatchewan in particular, an eroding of the K to 12 education system, where they've cut a lot of stuff back, including even just cursive, even just general writing is a problem.
Yes, yeah.
And they don't necessarily prepare them as much, perhaps, as they might have used to. And so, as I mentioned before, there's this presumption that, oh, it's school, it's all the same. You're a school teacher and this is just school. And it's not. It's not school. It's professional education, right? It's an actual institution. And it's that mindset that sometimes gets lost in the mix. And yes, some students have some issues trying to get used to that fact.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, it's, if they push through it, they get better at it and it actually helps them. But ultimately, as human beings, we're shaped by our experiences, right? How we experience things and how we react to things, for better or worse. But that's what shapes who we are. And so, somebody going into university and how they react to it and how they try to acclimatize themselves to it, that ultimately will shape who they are too.
Right.
And it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, right? Having negative things happen to us helps us in many ways build character. And if you take that away, I mean, if you baby people and all, I mean, I've got 5 kids. We all want to help, we all
Mhm.
want to help the kids, but sometimes you just have to stay back and, let them make their own decisions, let them make, their own choices or whatnot, because that's what makes them them.
For sure.
It's difficult to do, but ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it's much better for them in their development.
I totally agree. This has been really, really interesting. But I think we're just about out of time. But
Okay.
just stay on camera. I really appreciate you doing this. It's been great. Then to the audience, you've been listening to Jeffrey Walters, sessional lecturer at the University of Regina, Saskatchewan. Thank you, everybody, for watching the show. I hope you continue to do so. Take care, everybody, and peace out. Oh my God, that was so much fun. I just love it. It was just so interesting to me anyway. I hope other people felt it the same way.
Well, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, yeah. So and is going to air on the 30th of this month, around
Okay.
4 o'clock my time. So once it airs, I'll send you the link, okay? And thanks again for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really do. I appreciate you taking the time to talking with me. I really do.
Well, I didn't know what a seasonal intern was. I can't believe I did that.
It's okay. I mean, it happens, right?
Well, I believe, now this is my theory, because I always have trouble with reading, that letters move around on me deliberately. Anyway,
Yeah.
better end this. So again, I'm sure you're a busy person. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.